It's a Tuesday roughly 12,000 years ago, and you have had a day. A perfectly good deer outran you. Your cousin will not stop talking about the deer. There is no bar to go to, no group chat to complain in, and gummies with a QR code on the bag are about 11,990 years away. So you do the thing your descendants will do every single Friday until the sun burns out. You wander towards something that makes your brain feel a little bit different for a while. You already know this urge. You've felt it. The strange part is how far back it runs. Long before farming, before writing, before anyone built a single wall, somebody was sitting by a fire chasing a buzz. So the real question is this: what did early humans actually get high on back when nobody could write a word about it? The answer is older and a lot weirder than you'd think. Let's start with fire, because almost every story you're about to hear runs straight through it. Picture the first hearth. You are not a chemist. You are a cold person who wants to be a warm person, so you throw whatever's lying around onto the flames. Some of it is just wood. Some of it, by pure bad luck or excellent luck, is a plant that does something to your head when it burns. You breathe in, the fire breathes back. That's not a fantasy. At a spot in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert called the Wishbone Site, archaeologist Darren Duke found a hearth dated to about 12,300 years ago, and tucked in the ash were four tiny charred seeds of wild tobacco. Published in Nature Human Behavior in 2021, the oldest hard evidence of humans messing with tobacco anywhere on Earth, and it sat right next to the duck dinner. Nobody planted it. They were hunter-gatherers at the edge of an ancient wetland, and somehow tobacco was already on the menu. Takeaway: the fire didn't just cook your food, it introduced you to your first habit. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. What if wanting this isn't a flaw you picked up? What if it's wiring? A psychopharmacologist named Ronald K. Siegel spent decades studying exactly this. And in his book, Intoxication, he argued that the pursuit of altered states is a fourth drive. You've got hunger, you've got thirst, you've got the urge to reproduce. And sitting right next to them, Siegel said, is a fourth pull just as ancient and just as stubborn: the drive to occasionally feel not sober. His evidence wasn't only human, it was an entire zoo, which is the part that should worry you. Because if a creature with a brain the size of a walnut is seeking out a buzz, then this is not a modern character defect. It's much older than character. Takeaway: you may not have a drinking problem so much as a 400 million-year-old subscription you never agreed to. So who else is on the bottle? Quite a lot of the animal kingdom, it turns out. In Siberia, reindeer actively hunt down the fly agaric mushroom, the white-spotted red one from every fairy tale, and they get visibly, woozily strange afterward. Local herders noticed this thousands of years ago and, let's say, took notes. We'll leave the specifics of those notes in the past where they belong, but before you decide the wild is one big party, meet the buzzkill, the drunken elephant. You've heard they get hammered on fermented marula fruit. Researchers ran the numbers, and an elephant would have to inhale somewhere north of 1,400 rotting fruits in one sitting to feel a thing. The legend is mostly a myth we told because it's funny. The animals that genuinely do seek it, though, are smaller and closer to us. Takeaway: the buzz wasn't a human invention, we just inherited the taste. Closer to us, how exactly? Try a few million years closer. Robert Dudley, a biologist at UC Berkeley, has a theory he calls the drunken monkey hypothesis. Ripe fruit ferments. Fermenting fruit makes alcohol. So the apes and monkeys who could smell ethanol from across the forest found the ripest, most calorie-loaded fruit first, ate best, and passed those genes down to you. A 2022 study tracked black-handed spider monkeys in Panama happily eating fruit fermented up to around 2% alcohol, which is a light beer hanging from a branch. Recent work on wild chimps found they're knocking back the rough equivalent of a drink or two a day from fruit alone, without trying, which reframes your relationship with happy hour. You didn't discover alcohol. Your ancestors were tipsy primates long before they were upright, worried primates. Takeaway: the taste for booze may be older than the species drinking it. You probably learned the tidy version in school. First humans farmed grain, then they made bread, then civilization, and somewhere much later, beer as a treat. Cute. Possibly backwards. At Raqefet Cave near Haifa, archaeologist Li Liu and her Stanford team found residue in stone mortars, pointing to brewing roughly 13,000 years ago. That's the oldest known man-made alcohol on record, and the people doing it, the Natufians, hadn't fully invented farming yet. The beer came first. The crops may have followed to keep the beer coming. Even better, this wasn't a frat. The brewing happened at a burial ground, apparently for ritual feasts to honor the dead. So the first beer in history was, as far as we can tell, poured at a funeral. Honestly relatable, and the habit kept spreading. The oldest wine we've ever found sits in 8,000-year-old clay jars from the country of Georgia, identified by Patrick McGovern's team. Takeaway: one serious theory holds we settled down to farm mainly to keep the buzz coming, with the bread as a happy side effect. Tobacco and booze are one thing. What about the green stuff? For that we go up a mountain. High in the eastern Pamirs, at a site called the Jirzankal Cemetery, researchers led by Yimin Yang and Meng Ren cracked open graves from about 500 BC and found wooden braziers, 10 of them still coated in burnt residue. They tested it. The chemical signature screamed cannabis, and not the sleepy wild kind. This stuff carried unusually high levels of THC. Published in Science Advances in 2019, it's some of the clearest direct evidence we've got of people burning weed specifically to feel it. And the setting matters. These braziers sat in tombs, mourners gathered in tight mountain air with music and fire, sending smoke up to reach the dead. The first documented session on record was basically a seance with a really good supply. Takeaway: 2,500 years ago on a freezing plateau, somebody packed a bowl to talk to ghosts. If that sounds like a one-off, it wasn't. A Greek tourist wrote the next part down. Around 440 BC, the historian Herodotus described the Scythians, fierce horse riders of the steppe, doing something he found amazing. They'd build a small tent, drop heated stones inside, throw cannabis onto the stones, and sit in the rising smoke. According to him, they would howl with joy. Greeks got merry on wine, he noted, a little judgmentally. These people got there on vapor. For ages, scholars assumed Herodotus was exaggerating, like every travel writer ever. Then archaeologists dug up frozen Scythian tombs at Pazyryk and found the kit. Little tents, censers, pouches of cannabis seeds, all buried with the dead. The man was reporting, not embellishing. Takeaway: the world's first written drug review is roughly 2,500 years old, and it's a solid 4 stars. Smoke is one road in. Swallowing something is another, and that road gets darker. In a cave in central California, on the edge of Chumash country, there's a swirling red painting on the ceiling that looks like a pinwheel. Archaeologist David Robinson and colleagues looked closer and found chewed-up plant wads, quids, jammed into the rock above. Lab analysis came back loaded with atropine and scopolamine, the powerful, genuinely dangerous compounds in datura. The study, in PNAS in 2020, was called Unambiguous Confirmation that people were taking hallucinogens right there at the art site, roughly 400 years ago, and the pinwheel on the ceiling. Datura's flower unfurls in exactly that spiral at dusk, so the painting may be a portrait of the very thing they took. This was not a party plant. The Chumash treated datura as a living elder you approach with fear and ceremony, not a Tuesday. Takeaway: some of these substances were less a good time and more a terrifying job interview with the universe. Notice the pattern yet? Almost none of this is about fun. It keeps circling back to the sacred, which raises a genuinely huge question. How much of early religion was, well, chemical? Take Soma, the mystery drink praised across the ancient Hindu hymns of the Rig Veda as something that made priests feel immortal. Nobody today knows for sure what it was. Famously, the scholar Gordon Wasson argued it was the fly agaric mushroom, the same fairy tale fungus the reindeer love. Other experts think he's wrong. The debate is still going. Then there's ancient Greece. For 2,000 years, initiates traveled to Eleusis, drank a sacred barley brew called kykeon, and reportedly saw things that changed their lives forever. In 1978, Gordon Wasson teamed up with Albert Hofmann, the chemist who discovered LSD, and they proposed the Kikion got its kick from ergot, a fungus on grain that happens to contain LSD's chemical cousin. Recent digs in Spain even found ergot residue at a ritual site. Strong hypothesis, not a closed case. Takeaway: some of humanity's holiest experiences may have come with an ingredients list. Here's where I have to slow down and wave a flag, because the next idea is fun and very much not proven. A psychology professor named Benny Shannon, who'd spent years studying the Amazonian brew ayahuasca, looked at the Book of Exodus and noticed something. Two plants growing in the Sinai, acacia, and Syrian rue happen to contain the same chemistry as ayahuasca. So Shannon floated a hypothesis that some of the visions in the story, maybe even the bush that burned without burning up, could line up with a psychedelic experience. Now, Shannon himself titled his 2008 paper a speculative hypothesis, and that word speculative is load-bearing. There's no jar of ancient brew, no residue, no proof. It is an interesting coincidence wearing a lab coat. Treat it as a maybe, a fun one, not a fact. Takeaway: a striking pattern is not the same thing as evidence, and a careful brain keeps those two in separate drawers, which is the perfect moment to admit the giant hole in this entire video. We can prove the chemicals. Residue is hard science. We can scrape a brazier or a stone bowl, run it through a machine, and say with real confidence, that was cannabis, that was barley beer, that was datura. What we absolutely cannot do is climb inside a 12,000-year-old skull and ask, hey, how did that feel and what did you think was happening? So everything about meaning, the ghosts, the gods, the why, that's us reading tea leaves. Educated tea leaves, written by careful people, but tea leaves. The Stone Age left us the bottle and threw away the diary. Takeaway: when someone tells you precisely what an ancient person believed while high, your eyebrow should go up on its own. Speaking of eyebrows, we have to talk about the wildest theory in the whole field, the one that gets the most YouTube comments and the least scientific support. It's called the Stoned Ape theory, dreamed up by Terence McKenna in his 1992 book. The pitch: early humans ate psilocybin mushrooms. The trips supercharged their brains, and that chemical lightning bolt is what sparked language, imagination, and basically all of human consciousness. As an origin story, it absolutely slaps. As science, it falls over. Let me be blunt, because this is exactly the kind of claim this channel won't sell you. Mainstream researchers reject it. For starters, a trip doesn't rewrite your DNA, so a parent's mushroom experience can't be inherited by the kid. McKenna also leaned on a study about psychedelics and eyesight that the actual data doesn't support. So enjoy it as a campfire story. Do not file it next to the Utah hearth. Takeaway: the fact that an idea is awesome has never once made it true. So if it wasn't really about fun, when did the modern mess start? Roughly speaking, when the plant left the ritual. Look at the whole arc. 4 tobacco seeds in a Stone Age hearth. A funeral beer shared by a grieving village. Cannabis smoke sent up to honor the dead on a mountaintop. In nearly every ancient case, the substance came wrapped in rules. It was rare and communal, aimed at something bigger than your own buzz, and a shaman or an elder usually held the gate. Then, much later, somebody figured out how to strip the active part out, scale it up, and sell it by the carton. The brake pads of meaning got tossed out, and the engine kept revving. That tobacco that took 12,000 years to reach a Utah campfire eventually became a vending machine. Takeaway: the wanting is ancient. The selling is the recent and far more dangerous invention. And here's the reframe this whole thing has been building toward. We tend to file getting high as a modern problem. A sign society's gone soft. A thing that happened to us after we got comfortable, bored, and rich. Run the timeline back, and that story collapses. The fermented fruit predates the human. The funeral beer predates the farm. The tobacco predates the village. The smoke went up before the alphabet came down. And the most telling part: humans on every continent, with zero contact, kept inventing this same trick over and over, which is the signature of a species trait rather than a local bad habit. So this is not a crack in civilization that appeared once we had too much free time. It is older than civilization. The urge was already fully formed, sitting by a fire, 12,000 years before anyone invented the weekend it now haunts. You didn't inherit a modern vice. You inherited one of the oldest things a human can do. So, finally, plainly, what did early humans get high on? Whatever was growing nearby and willing to work. Wild tobacco in the American desert, cannabis on the mountains of Asia, fermented fruit, then beer, then wine, basically everywhere. Datura in California, probably mushrooms and ergot woven into the oldest religions we have records of. But notice the trick in my own question. Get high is your phrase, and mine. For most of these people, as best we can tell, this wasn't about feeling good. It was the phone line to the dead, the doorway to the gods, the rite that turned a child into an adult. We can prove the molecule with a machine. We cannot prove the meaning because the only witnesses have been gone for thousands of years and left no notes. The chemistry is settled. The experience is, and may stay, a rumor. There's a strange comfort buried in all of this. Most of these plants never made their chemicals for us in the first place. They brewed them as poisons to keep insects off their leaves, and our brains just happened to have locks those keys fit. But that same restless circuit, the one that made an ancestor poke a weird plant into a fire just to see, is the exact circuit that made us curious about everything else. The fire pokers became the herbalists. The herbalists fed the first medicine, and the wonder at what a mind could become is now sitting in real laboratories where researchers are carefully studying some of these very compounds for depression and trauma that nothing else has touched. The oldest impulse in the book is quietly getting a second, sober look. Takeaway: the urge that built 1,000 bad habits also built a fair amount of human knowledge, and it isn't finished yet. Which brings you back to that Tuesday, 12,000 years ago, you by the fire, tired, a little overwhelmed, reaching for the plant that makes the noise in your head go quiet for a minute. And here's the thing, if you stretched a single rope across all that time, from that hearth to whatever you've got planned this Friday, the same impulse would be holding both ends. Same craving, same little reach for the off switch, roughly the same brain. So when you finally unwind tonight, you're not doing anything new. You're keeping the oldest standing appointment our species has ever had. The only real question left is the one nobody by that first fire could answer either. What exactly were you all reaching for?